Scott, you've written a book on wealth, money, finance. Why? And why does it matter?
This is kind of a memo to my 25-year-old self. I've been rich 3 times, and the first 2 times I lost it. And I didn't grow up with a lot of money. It's been very important to me. I think America, and mostly in Europe, but especially America becomes more like itself every day. And that is, it's a generous, loving place if you have money. It's a rapacious, violent place if you don't. I think economic security is really important. And I think there's a series of habits and character traits that can help you get to economic security. You know that study that you become the average of your 5 closest friends, same body mass index, same politics, same sports team, same neighborhood. What they don't talk about is that amongst those 5 people, even if they're all making about the same amount of money, one will end up much more economically well off than the other 4. And I'm trying to understand the behaviors of that one person who becomes economically secure by the time they're my age without making a lot more money than their colleagues.
Do you think we're taught about money? Where did those people, that 1 in 5, where did they learn about money?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think so. The honest answer is I don't know. What I would say sociologically is that rich people talk about money, and it's considered taboo for employees and middle class and lower class and women to talk about money. Like, you're told not to talk about your salary at work. Asymmetry of information will always benefit the person that has symmetry, that knows the information. The boss of a company knows what everyone's making, but he tells his or her employees not to discuss their salary because Lisa might find out that Bob is making 30% more for doing the same work. So there's a bit of a zeitgeist that tells people not to talk about money, that it's like talking about porn or that it's vulgar. And I think you need to start talking about money and maintain a certain level of financial literacy from a very early age. Because Roger Federer talks about tennis. If you want to be good at anything, most people want to be good at money. And to be good at something, you need to understand it. And to understand it, you need to talk about it. So I'm very transparent with how much money I make, what I do with it. But talk to your friends about mortgage rates. Talk to your friends about how much money they make, what they're doing with it, where they lost money. And people aren't transparent about it, especially I think about men. We're supposed to be just like accidentally wealthy. And to ever talk about our financial problems is to admit that we're not ballers or that we're not masculine. And so I encourage people from a young age to start talking about money and understand it and be transparent about it.
Where did you learn about money? Because I think about my own life and I think there's key moments of, quite frankly, luck.
Yeah.
Where I was exposed to information because I was invited into a room, physically, literally into a room, or I was, through no decision of my own, someone came into my life.
Yeah.
Or in my case, maybe one of the biggest blessings I ever had is when I dropped out of university and pursued entrepreneurship,
Yep.
my brother decided to go be an investment banker for 11 years in London.
Yep.
And then when I had my first exit, he messaged me one day and said, "Hey, I'll manage your money and I'll quit my job and come work with you full time." And that's my older brother. So like, life gave me the greatest gift anyone could ever have been given.
That rings so true. So I think of 3 things as you said that. The first is the smartest thing I ever did was being born a white heterosexual male in California in the 60s, because it gave me unfair advantage. It gave me access to free education, the University of California, and access, 76% admissions rate. When I applied to UCLA, the admissions rate this year is 9%. I came of professional age in the 90s when the internet was coming online. So I sort of had these winds at my back. And also, just to be blunt, everyone that was raising capital looked, smelled, and felt like me. They were all white heterosexual males. And I didn't even realize at the time what privilege or unfair advantage I had. So the first is just sheer luck. The second is environmental. I was raised by a single immigrant mother who lived and died a secretary. And people who don't grow up with money, people who grow up with money just can't really truly empathize with what it's like to grow up without money. I felt as if there was this ghost following me and my mom around, constantly whispering in our ear, "You're not worthy. Your mom fucked up," which means you aren't worthy. And so I very early decided that economic security was really important to me. And I want to be clear, you can't make a decision to be wealthy. A lot of it is luck. But I was going to be very committed. My goal in life from 0 to 45 wasn't to be a good person. It wasn't to save the whales. It wasn't to have strong relationships. It was to get economic security. So I started connecting the dots around money pretty early. And then along the lines of what you were talking about, my mom had a boyfriend, and people don't talk about this. You know how in certain dramas they reference a second family where a guy has an entirely other family despite the fact he's married? My mom and I were that second family. Her boyfriend for 7 years was a wonderful man named Terry, really nice to me, spent every other weekend with us, super generous to me. He was also married with another family. So we were that second family. But he was a good man, and he was actually a good role model for me. And one weekend, I was asking him, "What is a stock?" And I was 13. And he said, "Here's $200." He gave me two crisp $100 bills and said, "Walk down to one of those stock brokerages, those fancy stock brokerages in Westwood Village, and buy some stock. And if you don't buy it by Monday afternoon or by the time I'm back next weekend, I'm taking my money back." So at 13, I marched down to Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner Smith, was in the lobby. I was ignored. I got intimidated. I walked across the street to Dean Witter Reynolds, another brokerage. And this young guy named Cy Sero came walking out and said, "Hi, I'm Cy Sero." And he gave me my first lesson in the markets. And I bought 14 shares of Columbia Pictures.
At 13, he gave you a lesson in the markets.
Yeah, at 13. And every day, every weekday for the next 3 years from Emerson Junior High payphone booth, I'd put 2 dimes in and call Cy. And he would say, "Close Encounters of the Third Kind is a hit," which means that Columbia Studios is going to make a lot of money, so people are buying more stock. And then I'd go into his office. I didn't have a ton of friends. And so I would just swing by Dean Witter, and he would always give me a lesson in the markets.
Had those two men not shown such generosity to you with their time and with that $200 bill, have you ever played out in your mind where you might be?
I think we all do that, like Sliding Doors, that movie. Things are, it's like life is such a series of, I promised myself I was going to approach this strange woman at the Raleigh Hotel in the middle of the day who was sitting by the pool, who was sitting there with another woman and another guy. And without the benefit of alcohol, it's not easy to open, a conversation with a strange woman. And I walked out to get my car and I said, I promised myself I was going to speak to her. I was very drawn to her, a beautiful woman. So I went back in, I just rolled right up and I said, "Hi, I'm Scott. Where are you guys from?" And this was at the Raleigh Hotel. Long story short, 18 months later, our first son's middle name is Raleigh, right? And what I tell people is that unless you're willing to take an uncomfortable risk, nothing wonderful is ever going to happen to you. I mean, a really uncomfortable risk. What you're doing here is an uncomfortable risk. It's public failure if it doesn't work. This podcast platform you're starting, most people aren't willing to take these risks. And a lot of this, not to get existential, a lot of this comes down to a huge unlock for me has been atheism. I think I have a very solid grasp of the finite nature of life. You're a young man, you're going to be my age in an instant. And the thing you're going to recognize is that, okay, in 30 or 40 years, everyone whose opinion you are worried about is going to be dead. And I have found that has been an enormous unlock for me, knowing that I'm going to, at some point sooner than I'd like, look into my kids' eyes and know our relationship is coming to an end. So I'm comfortable expressing my emotions, or more comfortable. I'm comfortable taking uncomfortable risks, knowing that if I call someone and ask them to invest, if I approach a strange woman in a bar and introduce myself, if I call an employee who I would never think would consider working for me, I'm not afraid of rejection, because I realize everyone I'm worried about being shamed by is going to be dead soon, and so am I. And so why wouldn't you live out life? Why wouldn't you live out loud? Why wouldn't you squeeze so much juice from this, lemon called life? It's really been an enormous unlock for me, because the reality, Steve, is that most people are not willing to take uncomfortable risks that might result in public shaming. It's embarrassing to get rejected to express interest in someone and be sort of rejected. It's embarrassing to try and raise money and be rejected. It's embarrassing to start a business and not have it work. The majority of people aren't willing to take those uncomfortable risks. And the reason why you get outsized return as an entrepreneur, the reason why you get outsized returns when you're willing to approach strangers and ask for mentorship, friendship, express romantic interest, is because you are willing to endure rejection. The most overcompensated people in any organization are the salespeople. In terms of how hard and how smart they are, how hard they work and how smart they are relative to their compensation, hands down, the most overcompensated people that everyone resents are the salespeople, because they are willing to get out a big spoon and eat shit. Do not call me again. Okay, so what you're saying is I should follow up in a couple of weeks, right? That type of rejection, that type of risk, that type of public failure 99% of people are not willing to endure. I ran for sophomore, junior, and senior class president in high school. I lost all three times. And based on my track record, I decided I should run for student body president, where I went on to, wait for it, lose. And it never really got in the way of my confidence, and that's the key. If you want, and unfortunately, young men are told, don't try hard, or they feel like a loss of agency, or especially romantically, they're told, be careful in terms of expressing romantic interest. And if you don't know the difference between expressing interest and asking someone out for coffee and harassing them, you've got bigger problems. But I think a lot of young men feel like their agency's been taken away. They feel like the game is rigged, so they're not trying. And quite frankly, they're spending too much time on a screen or in their home, so they're not putting themselves in a position to have something wonderful happen to them. And on a very basic level, I'm almost entirely sure that I can guarantee you that nothing really wonderful, I mean really wonderful, is going to happen to you inside of your home on a screen. Your success is a function of your ability to endure rejection, and increasingly how much time you spend outside of your house off a screen.